I never thought my morning would start with a parking war, but as soon as I stepped outside, I saw it. A sleek, white luxury car sitting smugly in my driveway like it owned the place. For a moment, I just stood there blinking, trying to process what I was looking at. My driveway wasn't small, but it was still very much my property. I glanced around, thinking maybe one of my neighbors had some kind of emergency and needed to use the space. But there was no sign of stress, nor any hurried person rushing to apologize for the inconvenience. Just the car sitting there, completely unmoved. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the irritation bubbling inside me. I had things to do, important things, and now, instead of getting on with my day, I had to deal with someone who had apparently decided my private property was a public parking lot. I walked up to the car, peering through the tinted windows, but the interior was empty. That was my first bad sign. If the driver had been waiting inside, at least I could have knocked on the window and gotten a quick explanation. But no, whoever this car belonged to had just parked and left, like they had every right to be here. Annoyed, I looked around to see if anyone was nearby who might know whose car this was. That's when I spotted her, a woman dressed in a designer coat and oversized sunglasses, strutting down the sidewalk like she was on a fashion runway. She wasn't hurrying. She wasn't looking around anxiously like someone who knew they were doing something wrong. No, she was casually chatting on her phone, completely unbothered, as if the world revolved around her. I had a sinking feeling in my gut. I already knew exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. I walked toward her, raising my voice enough to be heard over her conversation. "Excuse me, is this your car?" I gestured toward the white luxury vehicle taking up space in my driveway. She barely glanced at me, shifting her sunglasses just enough to give me a disinterested look before turning back to her call. Yeah, I'll be there in a second," she muttered to whoever was on the other end, before finally giving me her full attention. "Yes," she said, her tone already carrying the unmistakable weight of entitlement. "What's the problem?" I took a slow breath, trying to keep my patience intact. "The problem is that your car is parked in my driveway," I said, keeping my voice even. "This is private property. You need to move it." She blinked at me like I had just spoken a foreign language, then let out a laugh. "Oh, that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "I'll only be 5 minutes. I just had to stop by my friend's house real quick. No big deal." I stared at her, waiting for her to realize that what she had just said wasn't an acceptable response, but she didn't. Instead, she gave me a condescending smile, like I was some clueless fool making a fuss over nothing. 5 minutes, she repeated, as if that somehow made everything fine. I crossed my arms, feeling my irritation rise another notch. "It's a big deal to me," I said. "This is my driveway. You didn't ask for permission. You didn't even leave a note. You can't just park wherever you feel like it." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed by my argument. "Oh, relax," she sighed. "It's not like I'm blocking you in. You can still get out, right?" That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with a reasonable person. A reasonable person would have apologized, maybe given an excuse, and moved their car. This woman, on the other hand, was acting like I was the one being difficult. I clenched my jaw, deciding to give her one final chance. "I'm asking you nicely to move your car," I said, my voice firm. "If you don't, I'll have to take other measures." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, and what are you going to do? Call the cops over a parked car? Please." She let out a little scoff, shaking her head. "I told you I'll be 5 minutes." Then, just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into a nearby house without another word. I stood there for a second, processing what had just happened. The sheer audacity of this woman was almost impressive. Almost. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes. That's what she had said. I decided to be generous. I gave her exactly 5 minutes. I stood there watching the seconds tick by, half expecting her to reappear, at least making a show of pretending she was in a hurry. But she didn't. 5 minutes turned into 10, then 15, then 20. At this point, my patience had completely run dry. She had ignored my warning, treated me like some clueless nobody, and acted like the rules didn't apply to her. Well, if she thought she could get away with it that easily, she was in for a surprise. I turned toward my tractor, sitting nearby like an old, reliable friend. An idea started forming in my head, one that would make sure Karen never parked in my driveway again. If she wanted to treat my property like her personal parking lot, then she'd have to deal with the consequences. I climbed onto my tractor, the engine roaring to life beneath me. A few of my neighbors had already been watching the exchange, and now they looked even more interested, sensing that something was about to happen. I took my time, maneuvering the tractor carefully, gathering some old wooden pallets and a few large, heavy boulders from my property. Slowly, deliberately, I began placing them around her car, boxing it in from all sides. It wasn't damaging her car. It was just making sure she wouldn't be able to drive away anytime soon. The neighbors started chuckling, nodding in approval. One even grabbed an extra wheelbarrow of gravel and helped me add to the blockade. By the time I was finished, the car was completely surrounded. Karen was trapped. The best part? I was under no legal obligation to move any of it. This was my property, after all. If she wanted to leave, she'd have to come outside and actually ask me to remove the obstacles. And something told me that conversation was going to be a whole lot different from the last one. I climbed down from the tractor, dusting off my hands, as I leaned back against my porch, arms crossed, waiting. It was only a matter of time before she came out and realized she wasn't going anywhere. The neighbors didn't leave either. They were just as eager as I was to see what happened next. And as I took a sip of my coffee, enjoying the peaceful satisfaction of what I had just done, I knew one thing for sure. This was going to be entertaining. I stood back, arms crossed, watching the makeshift barricade I had built around Karen's car. It wasn't the most sophisticated trap in the world, but it didn't need to be. It was effective, and that was all that mattered. My driveway was no longer an open invitation for entitled strangers to park wherever they pleased. I could already imagine the moment she walked out and saw what I had done. The thought made me grin as I leaned against my tractor, waiting for the inevitable fireworks. The neighborhood was already buzzing with interest. A few of my neighbors had gathered casually, pretending to go about their day while sneaking glances at the spectacle. One of them, old Mr. Dawson from across the street, gave me an approving nod. "That's one way to handle it," he chuckled, rocking on his heels. "Bet she won't be laughing this time." Another neighbor, a middle-aged woman named Linda, sipped her tea on her porch with a smirk. "She's been parking like she owns the place for weeks," she murmured. About time someone put her in her place. I wasn't usually one for public confrontations, but this situation had rubbed me the wrong way from the start. Karen hadn't just parked in my driveway. She had done it with absolute confidence that she could get away with it. Her dismissive attitude, her arrogant smirk, the way she waved me off like I was nothing more than an annoying inconvenience all told me that she wasn't the type to learn unless she was forced to. And now, she was about to be. Minutes passed, and still no sign of Karen. I checked my watch again. It had been at least half an hour since she promised she'd only be gone for 5 minutes. The woman had lied through her teeth without hesitation, and that only made my decision to trap her car feel even more justified. If she thought she could come and go as she pleased, ignoring property lines and basic respect, she was in for a rude awakening. Finally, the door to the house she had disappeared into swung open. Out stepped Karen, still holding her phone in one hand, giggling about something with whoever was on the other end. She took her sweet time, not even glancing toward the driveway at first. I watched as she sauntered down the walkway, heels clicking against the pavement, her sunglasses still perched on her nose like she was too important to acknowledge the world around her. Then she finally looked up. The moment she spotted her car, her entire body froze. Her expression, which had been one of smug indifference just moments ago, shifted into something far less confident. She blinked, probably thinking she was seeing things. Then she took a step closer, her head tilting as she processed the scene before her. Her precious luxury car, boxed in by wooden pallets, heavy stones, and various other obstacles, was now a prisoner on my property. For a second, she didn't move. Then slowly, she turned to face me, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words. I didn't say anything. I just raised an eyebrow and waited. The neighborhood had gone almost completely silent, everyone watching to see what would happen next. Finally, Karen found her voice. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the quiet morning like nails on a chalkboard. "What did you do to my car?" She stormed over, her designer purse swinging wildly as she pointed an accusing finger at me. "Are you insane? You can't just block someone's car in like this." I shrugged. "Well, I figured since you weren't in any rush to leave, your car must have been pretty comfortable here. Thought I'd make sure it stayed that way." I took a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the way her face turned red with fury. "You said 5 minutes, Karen. It's been over 30. She let out a sharp breath, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Move it now," she demanded, her voice dripping with entitlement. "This is illegal. I'll call the cops." I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words. "Illegal? That's funny, considering you're the one who parked on private property without permission. I gestured toward the driveway. Your car isn't damaged. It's just secured. Besides, I gave you a fair warning. You ignored it. She let out an incredulous laugh, her hands flying up in frustration. This is ridiculous. You can't do this. I have places to be. I crossed my arms, meeting her glare with a calm expression. And I had things to do this morning, but your car was in my way. Funny how that works. Karen stomped her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. I'm not playing your stupid little game. Move these now, or I swear. Just then, the rumble of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. A tow truck was rolling down the street, its presence completely coincidental but perfectly timed. Karen's eyes widened in panic, and for a brief moment, I could see the gears turning in her head. She thought I had called a tow truck on her. Oh my God, no. You wouldn't, she gasped, stepping back in horror. I'll sue you. I swear I'll. But before she could complete her dramatic outburst, the tow truck slowed down and pulled into the driveway next door. The driver, a burly man in a grease-stained jumpsuit, hopped out and started hooking up my neighbor's old sedan. Apparently, Linda had scheduled a tow for her broken-down car, and the timing couldn't have been better. Karen let out a breath, clearly relieved that her car wasn't about to be hauled away, but the momentary panic had shaken her. She turned back to me, her fury renewed. You think this is funny? She snapped. I smirked a little. She let out another furious shriek before yanking her phone out again. That's it. I'm calling the police. This is harassment. I shrugged again. Go ahead. And she did. Right there in the middle of my driveway, she dialed 911 and launched into a breathless tirade about how she was being held hostage and how I had trapped her car illegally. I could hear the dispatcher's voice on the other end, calm and professional, asking her to clarify the situation. Karen, in her dramatic flair, made it sound like she was in imminent danger. When the police finally arrived, they took one look at the situation and immediately understood what was happening. One of the officers, a tall man with a tired expression, approached me first. Sir, can you explain what's going on here? I gestured toward the driveway. She parked on my property without permission. I asked her to move. She refused. So I made sure she wouldn't be able to ignore the problem. The officer turned to Karen, who was already on the verge of tears. Ma'am, is this true? He asked. She sniffled dramatically. He trapped my car. He can't do this. The officer sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, did you park on his private property without permission? Karen hesitated, clearly realizing she was losing ground. I was only going to be a few minutes. But you weren't, I pointed out. The officer let out another sigh, looking at Karen with thinly veiled irritation. Ma'am, you're technically trespassing. He had every right to block your car in. Karen's jaw dropped. What? You're siding with him? I'm siding with the law, the officer replied. Now, are you going to ask him nicely to move the barricade, or do you want to deal with a trespassing citation? Karen's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, fury, disbelief. Finally, with no other choice, she turned to me, her voice low and seething. Move it. I smirked. Say please. Karen's face twisted in rage the moment I told her to say please. For a second, I thought she might actually explode. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her lips pressed so tightly together that they turned white. The neighborhood was completely silent now, all eyes on her. Even the police officer looked mildly amused, though he was doing his best to remain professional. She let out a shaky breath, nostrils flaring. Move it, she hissed. I didn't move an inch. I simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. Karen's jaw tightened. Move it. I took a slow sip of my coffee, making it clear that I had all the time in the world. The power balance had completely shifted, and she knew it. For once, she wasn't in control, and the realization was hitting her like a truck. She had no choice. If she wanted her car back, she was going to have to swallow her pride. Her shoulders trembled with frustration. Fine, she spat. Please. I smiled. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? She made a strangled noise in the back of her throat, like she was holding back a scream. But she had said the magic word, and I wasn't cruel enough to drag this out any longer. I turned back to my makeshift barricade, taking my sweet time moving the wooden pallets and shifting the heavier objects with my tractor. The entire time, Karen stood there, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently, like she was doing me a favor by waiting. It took about 10 minutes to clear everything out. The second there was enough space for her to back out, Karen bolted for her car. She didn't even thank me, not that I expected her to. She yanked the door open, threw herself into the driver's seat, and slammed the door so hard that I was half surprised the window didn't shatter. She started the engine, revving it aggressively like she thought she was in some kind of action movie. Then, without looking, she slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as she backed out. In her blind rage, she miscalculated the angle, and her back will hit the edge of the curb hard. The car bounced, and she let out a startled yelp. A few of the neighbors chuckled under their breath, and I had to fight the urge to laugh. Karen quickly corrected herself, yanking the wheel to straighten out. Then she threw the car into drive and sped off down the street, her tires kicking up dust as she went. She didn't look back. The second she was gone, the entire neighborhood burst into applause. "Now that," Mr. Dawson said with a grin, "was the best thing I've seen all year." Linda laughed, shaking her head. "You handled that beautifully. I would have just called a tow truck and let them deal with it. But your way was much more entertaining." I shrugged, taking another sip of my coffee. She needed a lesson. Something tells me she won't be parking here again anytime soon. One of the younger neighbors, a teenager who had been watching the whole thing unfold from his bike, grinned. "Dude, I got that all on video. You mind if I post it?" I thought about it for a second, then shrugged. "Go ahead. Just blur out my face." He nodded eagerly, already pulling out his phone to edit the footage. As everyone slowly dispersed, I finally let out a long breath, feeling the tension leave my body. The whole ordeal had been more exhausting than I expected, but in the end, it had been worth it. Karen had learned that she couldn't just walk all over people, at least not in this neighborhood. And if she ever forgot that lesson, well, I had a tractor and plenty of free time. The rest of the day passed without incident. I went about my chores, feeling lighter now that the situation was behind me. That night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, feeling good about how things had turned out. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a notification from one of the neighborhood group chats. Curious, I opened it. The moment I did, my eyes widened. The video of Karen's meltdown had already gone viral. The teenager who recorded it had uploaded it to social media just a few hours ago, and it had already racked up thousands of views. The title alone was enough to make me laugh. Karen parked in his driveway, so he trapped her car with a tractor. The comments were even better. "This is the level of petty I aspire to be. Bro just reinvented the concept of parking enforcement. The fact that she really thought she could win this is hilarious. This deserves an award." I scrolled through them, shaking my head in amusement. Then, just as I was about to put my phone down, a new message popped up in the group chat. Linda had posted a screenshot of a post Karen had made on her personal social media account. "She's ranting about it online," Linda wrote, followed by a string of laughing emojis. I clicked on the screenshot. Karen's post was exactly what I expected, an all-caps meltdown about how she had been publicly humiliated by a petty, bitter man who had trapped her car like a child playing with toy blocks. She insisted that she was the victim, that I had violated her rights, and that she was considering legal action. The comment section on her post was a disaster. Instead of the sympathy she was clearly fishing for, people were roasting her mercilessly. "Girl, you parked in his driveway. What did you expect? You really thought you were in the right, huh? This is embarrassing. Just take the L and move on." I couldn't help but laugh. Karen had been so convinced that she was untouchable, that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. But now, the whole internet was against her, and there was nothing she could do about it. I closed the chat and leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms behind my head. Karen had come into my life thinking she could do whatever she wanted. She had ignored my warnings, dismissed my words, and treated me like I didn't matter. But in the end, she had learned a very valuable lesson. Actions have consequences, and some people aren't afraid to teach them. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing like crazy. At first, I thought it was just the usual group chat notifications, maybe the neighbors still laughing about what had happened with Karen. But when I picked up my phone and glanced at the screen, I realized it was much bigger than that. My social media notifications were out of control. Apparently, the video had exploded overnight. The teenager who uploaded it had sent me a message, excitedly telling me that the clip had hit over 1 million views. People were sharing it everywhere, and it had even made its way onto bigger platforms. I shook my head, half amused and half amazed. I hadn't expected things to blow up like this. The internet loved a good dose of justice, and apparently trapping Karen's car had struck a nerve with people everywhere. The comments were still rolling in, filled with jokes, memes, and praise for how I had handled the situation. It wasn't long before I got a message from Linda. "Guess who's having a meltdown online?" she wrote, attaching another screenshot from Karen's personal page. I opened it and laughed. Karen was in full damage control mode. Her latest post was a long-winded rant about how she was being cyberbullied and how people were taking things out of context. She tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming that I had overreacted and that she had been barely parked for a moment before I unreasonably flipped out. The best part? She ended her rant by saying she was planning to pursue legal action for defamation. I shook my head, not even remotely surprised. Karen was exactly the type of person who couldn't admit when she was wrong. Instead of just letting it go and moving on, she was digging herself deeper into the hole she had created. If she had just apologized and left things alone, people probably would have forgotten about her by now. But instead, she was only making things worse for herself. Before I could even put my phone down, another notification popped up. This time, it was a private message from an unknown number. I clicked on it and immediately sighed. It was Karen. Her message was exactly what I expected, passive-aggressive and dripping with entitlement. She demanded that I tell the internet to back off and that I owed her an apology for humiliating her. She insisted that she had suffered enough and that if I didn't do something to fix the situation, she would take legal action. I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether I should even respond. I wasn't worried about any so-called legal action. She had no case, and we both knew it. But the fact that she thought she could still bully me into doing what she wanted was almost laughable. After a moment, I typed back a simple response. Actions have consequences, Karen. I hit send and put my phone down, deciding that was the last time I was going to deal with her nonsense. If she wanted to keep making a fool of herself online, that was her problem. A few hours later, I was outside working on some yard maintenance when I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up. I looked up, expecting to see one of my neighbors, but instead, I saw a vehicle I recognized all too well. It was Karen. She stepped out of the car, looking more frazzled than I had ever seen her. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and she wasn't wearing her usual smug expression. Instead, she looked tense, her lips pressed into a thin line as she adjusted her sunglasses and marched toward me. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She stopped a few feet away, shifting uncomfortably as if she wasn't sure how to start. I could tell that she didn't want to be here, but something had forced her hand. After an awkward silence, she finally spoke. Look, she said, crossing her arms. I think we both took things too far. I raised an eyebrow. That was the closest thing to an admission of guilt I was probably ever going to get from her. I just want this to be over, she continued. I don't want people harassing me online, and I'm sure you don't want to keep dealing with all of this either. So let's just move on. No hard feelings. I almost laughed. No hard feelings? After everything she had done? After refusing to move her car, calling the cops on me, and then trying to play the victim online? I shook my head. Karen, this situation was over the moment you drove away. You're the one who kept making it worse. Her jaw tightened, but she forced a strange smile. Right. Well, anyway, I just wanted to say my piece. I could tell she was expecting me to agree, to shake hands and pretend nothing had happened, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I simply nodded. Have a nice day. She huffed, clearly irritated that I wasn't giving her the reaction she wanted. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back to her car. She slammed the door shut and sped off, just like last time. As I watched her drive away, I felt nothing but relief. I had no doubt that Karen would continue to be a problem for someone else in the future, but at least she had learned one thing. She wouldn't be pushing people around in this neighborhood anymore. That night, I checked my phone one last time before bed. The video had continued to spread, and now news outlets were picking it up. Articles with headlines like "Man uses tractor to teach entitled Karen a lesson" were making the rounds, and people everywhere were talking about it. I scrolled through the comments, shaking my head at how much attention the whole thing had gotten. But as ridiculous as it all was, one thing was clear. People loved seeing justice served. I set my phone down and stretched out, feeling more relaxed than I had in days. Karen had tried to push her luck, but in the end, she had only embarrassed herself. And now, as far as I was concerned, the whole situation was officially over. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but smile. Some people never learn, but every now and then, life gives them a much-needed reality check. And this time, I had been more than happy to provide it. A week had passed since the whole incident with Karen, and life had more or less gone back to normal. The initial excitement had worn off, and while the video was still making rounds on social media, I had stopped checking the comments every few hours. People had their fun, laughed at Karen's meltdown, and moved on to the next viral moment. At least, that's what I thought. One morning, I was sipping my coffee on the porch when Linda walked over with her phone in hand. She had a smirk on her face, the the kind that told me she had some news that I might find interesting. I raised an eyebrow as she handed me her phone. "You might want to see this," she said, barely holding back her amusement. I took the phone and glanced at the screen. It was another screenshot from Karen's social media page. At first, I thought it would just be another rant about how unfairly she had been treated. But when I read the actual post, I nearly spit out my coffee. Karen had written a long, dramatic message about how she was being harassed and bullied by the internet. But the best part? She was now claiming that she was the real victim, that she had suffered emotional distress from being humiliated, and that she was considering legal action, not just against me, but against the social media platforms that had allowed the video to go viral. I handed the phone back to Linda, shaking my head. "She just doesn't know when to quit, does she?" Linda laughed. "Apparently not. She's even trying to start a petition to get the video taken down. So far, she's got about 12 signatures." I chuckled. The internet wasn't going to forget this story anytime soon, no matter how hard she tried. But as far as I was concerned, Karen wasn't my problem anymore. She could scream into the void all she wanted, but I had better things to do. A couple of days later, I was out in the yard when a car pulled up near the driveway. I tensed for a moment, wondering if Karen had decided to show up again for another round of nonsense. But when I saw who stepped out, I let out a relieved breath. It wasn't Karen. It was the police officer who had come by during the original confrontation. He walked up with a neutral expression, clipboard in hand. I greeted him with a nod. "Officer, what can I do for you?" He sighed, flipping through his notes. "Well, I just wanted to give you a heads up. That woman, Karen, actually tried to file a formal complaint against you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" He gave me a look that told me even he wasn't taking it seriously. "She claims you caused her emotional distress, unfairly targeted her, and encouraged online harassment. She also insists that you tampered with her vehicle, which, from what I saw, is a pretty big stretch." I shook my head, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "And does she actually have a case?" The officer let out a dry laugh. "Not even close. But she's persistent. She's been calling the department almost every day demanding that we do something." I smirked. "So what happens now?" He shrugged. "Nothing, as far as we're concerned. This is a non-issue. She was trespassing on private property, refused to leave, and faced the consequences. No damage was done to her vehicle, and she had every opportunity to avoid the situation. The only reason I'm here is to let you know that she's still trying to make a fuss about it." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Good to know. Thanks for the heads up." The officer nodded. "No problem. Just figured you'd want to know in case she tries anything else." As he walked back to his car, I shook my head in disbelief. Karen really was determined to make this into a bigger deal than it was. But no matter how much she screamed and complained, she wasn't going to change the fact that she had been in the wrong. Later that afternoon, I got another message from the teenager who had uploaded the video. He was excited to tell me that it had now passed 5 million views. People were still talking about it, making memes, and sharing their own stories of dealing with entitled people like Karen. Some even joked that I should start a driveway justice series and teach more Karens a lesson. I laughed at the idea, but at the same time, I was glad that so many people had enjoyed the story. If nothing else, at least Karen had provided the world with some entertainment. A few days later, I was out at the hardware store when I heard someone whispering behind me. I turned slightly, and sure enough, there were 2 people staring at me, trying to be subtle about it. One of them finally worked up the courage to approach. "Hey, are you the guy from the Karen video?" I chuckled. "Depends. Am I about to get yelled at or congratulated?" The guy laughed. "Definitely congratulated. That was legendary, man. The way you handled her? Perfect." His friend nodded. "You're basically a hero at this point. Internet justice at its finest." I thanked them and went about my shopping, but the encounter made me realize just how far the story had spread. What had started as a simple act of petty revenge had turned into something way bigger than I had ever imagined. By the end of the week, the buzz had finally started to die down. Karen, realizing that her attempts to control the situation were going nowhere, stopped making posts about it. The video was still floating around, but people had moved on to the next viral moment. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought back to the whole ordeal. I had never set out to go viral. I had just wanted to prove a point, to show Karen that actions had consequences, that entitlement didn't mean she could do whatever she wanted. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. Karen had been forced to face reality, even if she refused to admit it. She had embarrassed herself on a global scale, all because she couldn't be bothered to follow basic rules. As I leaned back, feeling the cool breeze against my skin, I knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't be parking in my driveway again.